she cried the young Apache woman, and the cowboy's next act outraged the town. The morning they found her, the air smelled of iron and coming rain, and the grass along the creek bed lay flattened in the direction she had run, evidence as plain as a signature. Nora had been running since the last hour of darkness, her feet bare against the cold earth, her breath coming in short pulls that tasted of blood where she had bitten her cheek trying not to make a sound. The sky above the Nebraska plain was just beginning to show its first pale bruise of light when she heard the horse. She pressed herself into the bank of the creek, thigh-deep in black water so cold it felt like being held by something without hands. The cottonwood roots above her head dripped into her hair. She did not breathe. She had learned the particular stillness of a creature that knows it is being hunted, the way you could become part of the earth if you let go of the idea that you mattered, that your discomfort was relevant, that the cold was something to resist. The horse stopped at the water's edge. She heard the creak of a saddle, the sound of a man stepping down, the heavy, patient exhalation of a large animal resting. Then boots on gravel, slow, no urgency in them. "Water's cold this time of year." The voice came from above and to the left, low, not unkind. Nora did not answer. "I'm not going to reach into that bank and drag you out," the voice said. "You can stay in there until your legs stop working, or you can come out and get warm. Either one's your choice." She had been told many things in her 23 years of life. She had been told she was owned, that she was foolish, that Apache women had no business being in a settlement at all, and even less business refusing what a man decided he wanted from her. She had been told her mother's people were savages, and that her mother had made a mistake marrying a white man, and that the mistake had been corrected when the fever took him. She had been told many things. She was not accustomed to being told that a choice was hers. She came out of the water because her legs had, in fact, stopped working. She would have liked to tell herself it was something else, dignity, strategy, decision. But it was the cold. She pulled herself up the bank with her hands and lay in the grass breathing, and the boots came to stand near her and then stopped, and the man crouched down so he was not above her anymore. He had a face that had been outside in every weather. Brown eyes the color of creek water in summer, a jaw that had not seen a razor in several days. He was looking at her the way a person looked at something they did not yet understand but intended to. "Can you walk?" he said. She pushed herself to sitting. Her wrists showed the marks of rope. She watched him look at them and watched him decide not to say anything about it, and something in her chest registered this, though she did not have a name for it yet. "My name is Cole Briggs," he said. "I've got a camp about a quarter-mile east, fire, food. I've also got no interest in what you were running from or who you belong to." He paused. "Nobody belongs to anybody, that's my view." Nora looked at him for a long time. The light was coming up fast now, the plain going from gray to gold, and somewhere behind her the settlement of Harlow Creek was waking up, and some of the men in it would be looking for her. She knew what she was worth to Elia's drum. She knew what he would do when he found her. "They'll come looking," she said. Her voice was rougher than she expected. She had not used it in 2 days. "I expect they will," Cole said. He stood, and she saw that he was tall and that his hands, when he offered one to her, were wide and calloused and did not shake. She took it. She did not understand until later, until she was sitting wrapped in his bedroll beside a fire that smelled of pine and dried sage, with a tin cup of coffee warming both her palms, that what she had felt when she took his hand was not rescue. She had rescued herself. She had run through the dark alone and gotten herself to the water. What she had felt was something rarer than rescue. It was the specific sensation of arriving somewhere that was not, for the moment, dangerous, and not knowing what to do with that fact. She drank her coffee. Her feet began to hurt as the warmth returned to them, which meant they were still alive, which meant she had not lost them to the cold, which meant she had one more thing to contend with. She had always been good at that, contending with one more thing. The fire cracked and sent a shower of sparks up into the lightening air. Cole sat across from her and did not ask her name, and she thought about giving it to him anyway, and then thought she would wait. There was time. If there was one thing running through the dark and the cold water had taught her, it was that she was still here, and she intended to stay. The town of Harlow Creek had a single main street, a general store, 2 saloons, a church that had been built optimistic and used pessimistic, and a population of 312 people who had, collectively, very strong opinions about what was proper. Nora understood this from the way they looked at her when Cole brought her in. He had not asked her if she wanted to go to town. He had asked her if she needed a doctor, and she had said she needed boots, and he had taken her at her word and ridden to Harlow Creek with her on his horse behind him, which was the first of several decisions he made that day that the town found objectionable. The second was speaking to her in the street, as though she were someone worth speaking to. The third was walking into Thatcher's general store with her at his side and asking old man Thatcher for boots in her size, paying for them himself, and then handing them to her without ceremony, the way you handed a person something they needed. She laced them up sitting on Thatcher's front step while Cole leaned against the post and watched the street, and she felt the eyes of the town on her neck like a specific weather, not wind, exactly, but pressure. The boots were leather, brown, slightly too wide in the toe. They were the most solid things she had owned in 2 years. "Drum will hear you brought me in," she said. "I didn't bring you in, you came in." He pulled the brim of his hat against the sun, "and yes, he'll hear." Elias Drum owned the largest spread outside town and a considerable portion of what happened inside it. He had bought Nora from her stepfather 3 years ago in a transaction that had been called by various names, none of them honest. In Drum's house she had cooked and cleaned and endured and planned, in the way that a woman with nowhere to go plans, not in days but in sensations, in the small archived knowledge of which windows could be opened silently, which horses were kept saddled past midnight, which direction the creek ran. She had learned patience the way the body learns pain, completely. "He'll say I'm his property," she said, not frightened, just informational. Cole looked at her then, and there was something in his face that she did not know how to categorize, not pity, which she was accustomed to and despised, and not admiration, which she had learned to distrust. Something more plain than either, something that said he was listening. "He can say whatever he wants," Cole said, "doesn't make it true." She thought about her mother, who had said almost the same thing once, standing in a field in New Mexico with the sun in her hair, saying the words that white men put on paper about land and ownership were just words, and the land didn't know them. Her mother had been wrong about that, practically speaking. The land had been taken anyway. But the principle of it, the refusal to let a lie become the truth just because someone had said it loud enough, that had stayed in Nora's blood like something inherited. She stood up in her new boots and tested her weight in them. "Where are you camped?" she asked. 2 miles out, past the Mill Creek Bend." She looked down the street, where 3 men had gathered in front of the saloon and were watching them with the particular attention of people deciding whether to do something about something. She looked at Cole, who had also seen them and was not, she noted, adjusting his posture or his expression in response. "I'll need somewhere to sleep that isn't a cell or Drum's house," she said. "I've got a second tent," he said. The men in front of the saloon had been joined by a fourth. Nora could see, at the far end of the street, the particular set of shoulders that belonged to Elias Drum, that particular heaviness in the way he moved, like a man who expected the ground to arrange itself under him. She had memorized that silhouette. It was one of the things you learned when you lived in fear, the specific shape of the thing you feared, so that you could never mistake it. "Then let's go," she said. They walked to the horse. Cole helped her up first, his hand at her elbow steady and without presumption, and then swung up behind her, and they rode out of Harlow Creek with the eyes of the town on their backs like stones. She sat straight. She had learned that too, the architecture of not giving anyone the satisfaction of watching you fold. The camp was clean and practical. A fire ring with a flat rock beside it that served as a table. 2 tents, as he had said. The horses picketed on good grass near the creek. The smell of wood smoke and something cooking, dried beans and dried meat, nothing elaborate, that landed in her chest with a warmth she did not fully understand until she realized it was the smell of a meal made without threat. Her mother used to cook in the evening with the tent flap open. The smell of food and the smell of open air mixed together. She had not thought of that in years. Her body had remembered it before her mind caught up, and for a moment she was 8 years old and completely safe. And then she was herself again, 23, sitting at a stranger's fire in borrowed boots, and she ate the food he offered her and did not speak, and he seemed to understand that silence was not distance but simply where she was, and he let her be there. There were things that needed doing at a camp, and Nora had always understood the logic of work. How it organized the body when the mind was too full, how the specific attention required to do something well was its own kind of peace. She woke the second morning before Cole did and rebuilt the fire. And by the time he came out of his tent, she had coffee made and the horses checked, and a problem identified with the left rear shoe of his sorrel, which she told him about in the flat, practical terms of someone who had spent considerable time around horses. He looked at her across the fire. "You know horses." "My father did before he died." She handed him a cup. "The shoe's pulling loose at the toe. It'll throw him lame inside a week if you don't have it reset. There's a farrier in town." "I know." She did not say what they both understood, that going back to town was a different proposition than it had been 2 days ago. Elia's drum had had 2 days to speak to people, to arrange the version of events he preferred. Cole drank his coffee. "I'll go, you stay." "I don't need you to go for me." "I know you don't." He said it simply, not in the way men said it when they meant the opposite. "But I've got business at the mill anyway, and you've got a bruise along your jaw that people will stare at, and starring costs time." She touched her jaw without thinking. The bruise had faded to yellow at the edges, green at the center. She had stopped noticing it the way you stopped noticing a sound that was always there. "Fine," she said. He left, and she was alone in the camp, and the morning was enormous around her. The sky that kind of blue that seems to go up forever, the grass moving in long, slow waves, the creek running its particular conversation over the rocks. She had been alone plenty. She knew the texture of it, but this was a different kind of alone, not the loneliness of Drum's house, where the walls were close and the silence was a weapon. This was the aloneness of the open world, where the distance in every direction was hers. She did not sit still. She cleared the camp of dead wood, stacked what was usable, hauled water from the creek, mended a tear in the canvas of her tent with a length of cord she found in Cole's gear, not taking without asking, just using what was available and would be needed, which she thought he would understand. Then she sat by the fire and thought about what came next. What came next was the question she had been running from since she'd run. Drum would not stop. He had money and he had men, and he had the law arranged the way powerful men arrange the law. She had boots and a camp and a stranger who had so far been exactly as decent as he seemed, which made her trust him less, not more, because decency in her experience was generally a prelude to something. Except there was a thing her hands had remembered that morning, waking in the tent with the sound of the creek in her ears. The particular feeling of sleeping somewhere she had not in the night, woken herself listening. She had slept the full dark. She had not been listening. Her body had made a decision her mind had not authorized, and she was still sitting with the strangeness of it when Cole came back from town with the horse reshod and 2 cans of peaches and news. "Drum's filed a complaint with the sheriff," he said. "Says you stole from him when you left." "What did I take?" "As far as I can tell, yourself." She looked at him. He sat down on the flat rock and opened one of the cans with his knife and offered it to her first, the way someone did when they were not thinking about it, when it was just the natural direction of a thing. "What happens now?" she said. "Well," he took a peach slice. The sheriff's Ede Mallory, and Ede Mallory does what Drum tells him most of the time, but he's also got a line he won't cross if there are enough witnesses. So what matters is who's watching. You have people who'd watch. I have a couple, he paused. I should tell you something, I knew your father. Nora was quiet for a moment. James running waiter. James, yes. We worked the same cattle drive 2 years before he died. He talked about you. He looked at the can of peaches and then at her. He said you had a memory like a river, that you forgot nothing. He paused again, and there was something careful in his voice now. He said he worried about leaving you with your stepfather. She breathed through that. Her father's hands, large and dark, showing her how to tell which way a horse was favoring its weight. The smell of his coat, tobacco and saddle oil, and something that was just him. She had not let herself think of it in years because it was the kind of thing that, once opened, could not be easily closed again. He was right to worry, she said. Cole nodded. He did not offer anything else, and she was grateful for that, for the understanding that some things did not need elaboration, that the shape of a life could be acknowledged without being examined. They ate the peaches in the long afternoon light, and the creek ran, and she decided, not with drama, not with any ceremony, just in the quiet practical part of herself, that she would not run again unless she chose to. That this camp, this fire, this entirely uncertain situation, was a place she was in because she had decided to be in it. It was a small decision. It was the most significant one she had made in years. The weather changed on the 4th day, coming in from the north with the specific intention of the high plains, sudden, total, indifferent to whatever plans anyone had made below it. Nora and Cole broke camp at dawn and moved to the shelter of the tree line along the eastern creek bank, and they worked together without much speech in the way that two people work when they understand the task and understand each other well enough to stay out of each other's way. She drove the tent stakes and he rigged the canvas against the wind, and they loaded the perishables into the driest corner of the shelter. And the whole time the sky above them was doing something violent and spectacular. It was during the work that she became aware of him as a specific physical fact, not as a function, not as safety or danger, but as a person with a particular way of moving through space. He was economical. He did not waste effort. When he lifted something, he knew exactly where he was putting it before he picked it up. She had grown up among Apache men who moved like this, with the total efficiency of people who had been shaped by country that asked a lot of them, and she felt something register in her body that was not gratitude and was not attraction exactly. It was recognition. The recognition of someone who had learned the world the same way you had. The storm hit in earnest around mid-morning. They sat in the shelter and listened to it work, and it was loud enough that conversation required an effort, so they mostly did not bother, and this was comfortable in a way she had not expected. She had spent years in rooms where silence was a threat. This was different. This was two people and a fire and the vast democratic noise of weather that didn't care about either of them. Cole showed her in the afternoon lull how to read the grass for water. She showed him how her people read the direction of wind off the way certain plants turned their leaves. He knew some of this already, and she could see that he was genuinely interested in what he did not know, which was a rarer quality than it should have been. "You spent time with Apache people?" she asked. "Some years ago, down in the territory." He looked at the sky. "I was young and stupid, and they mostly ignored me until I was useful." "They taught you anyway." "Some of them. There was a woman who taught me to track. She found it funny that I didn't already know." He smiled slightly. "I think it was Charity." Nora thought about the women she had grown up among, her mother's sisters, her grandmother with her extraordinary patience and her total lack of interest in being romanticized. They would have found Cole Briggs interesting because he was interested. That was the criterion. Not whether he was afraid of them or fascinated by them in the peculiar consuming way some white men were, not that. Simply, was he paying attention? Was he useful? Did he learn? "She wasn't wrong," Nora said. "Charity's not a small thing." He looked at her, and something shifted in the quality of the afternoon, the light perhaps, or the sound of the rain, or the particular angle of his attention. She was aware of the distance between them as a thing with dimensions, aware that it was about the length of a person's arm. She looked at the fire instead. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask." "Where do you want to go when this is settled?" He paused. "Or is it not something you know yet?" She had not been asked this by anyone in years. "Where do you want to go?" She sat with the question and let herself actually consider it, which was harder than she expected, because she had spent so long not being permitted to want anything except the ordinary necessities of survival. "West," she said. "There's family on my mother's side. A cousin who went to the territory with her husband 10 years ago. I don't know if she's still there." She paused. "I'd like to find out." "That's a reasonable thing to want," Cole said. And the way he said it, not encouraging, not sentimental, just the plain acknowledgement of a reasonable thing, settled in her chest like something that had found the right shelf. The rain ran down the canvas above them, and the fire argued with the wind, and she stayed inside it all and felt, not for the first time but more clearly than before, that she had found herself in a circumstance that was not designed to destroy her. She was not yet certain what to do with this. She had the sense that learning it would take time, and that she had now something she had not had in years. Time. They came on a Thursday, 3 of them, which was either overconfidence or a sign that Drum thought 2 would be enough and brought a third for courtesy. Nora heard the horses before Cole did. She was at the creek when the sound came to her, the specific rhythm of horses being ridden with purpose. And she was back at camp, and had Cole awake and the rifle in her hands before he'd fully understood what had woken her. 3, she said, coming from the south. He was up, boots on, moving toward the horses. "Can you shoot that?" She had grown up hunting with her father, who had believed firmly that a person who could not feed themselves was a person at the mercy of whoever could. "Yes," she said. He took his own rifle from the saddle scabbard. They positioned, Cole to the left of the camp where the tree line gave cover, Nora to the right beside the stacked firewood, which was not ideal cover but was solid. The riders came out of the long grass at the pace of men who expected no resistance. Elia's Drum was not among them, which was not a surprise. Drum sent men. That was what having money meant. Your violence was always at a remove. The 3 who came into camp were Drum's foreman, a man called Pincher, who had a face that seemed to have been rearranged at some point and never properly set, and 2 younger men she recognized from Drum's spread. They all carried rifles. They all looked at the camp and then at Cole, standing in the open, and then at Nora, which is when Pincher's expression changed. "That's Drum's property," he said, as though she were a piece of equipment that had walked off. "That's a woman's name and you don't know it," Cole said, "which tells me you've never thought to ask." Pincher looked at him with the particular contempt of a man who has been sent to do something and finds the target talking. "Mr. Drum has a legal claim, filed with Sheriff Mallory. We're here to collect what's his." "Nora," Cole's voice was steady, "you want to go with them?" "No," she said. "There it is," Cole said. What happened next happened in the way that physical confrontations happen, in the body first, in the specific geometries of 3 men deciding whether they were willing to die for their employer's property dispute, and 2 people who were positioned where they were positioned. Pincher looked at the rifle in her hands, and then at the one in Cole's, and then at the angles, and she watched him do the mathematics of it. She was not afraid. She was beyond fear into something colder and more useful, the absolute clarity of someone who has already decided. "She's a thief," Pincher said, "and you're harboring her." "I'm having coffee," Cole said. "She's having coffee, you're trespassing." Pincher's horse shifted under him. One of the younger men looked at the other. Nora kept her eyes on Pincher and kept her breathing even and did not move the rifle, which was pointed at a spot between the foreman and the sky, not at any of them yet, but not away from any of them either. "This isn't finished," Pincher said. Things rarely are, Cole said. You can find your way back the way you came. I'd do it before dark. The three of them turned their horses. One of the younger men looked back at her once, not with menace, she thought, but with something that might have been curiosity or might have been the beginning of a question he didn't know how to form. She held his gaze until he looked away. When they were gone, the camp was very quiet. The grass moved in the wind. A bird she could not see was making its small particular argument somewhere in the cottonwoods. She lowered the rifle and let out a breath she had not been entirely aware of holding. Cole walked over to her. He looked at the direction the men had gone and then at her. "You all right?" Yes, she was. She was also shaking slightly in her hands, the adrenaline finding somewhere to go now that it was not needed, which was normal and meant nothing about whether she was afraid. "They'll be back," she said. "They'll be back," he agreed. "We'll need to be somewhere else." She looked at him. He was watching her with that steady, direct attention he had, not searching her face for how she felt, just looking at her the way you looked at someone you were having a serious conversation with. "I'll go to the sheriff," she said. "Not Ed Mallory, the federal marshal. There's one in Kearney. That's a 2-day ride." "I know." She tested the rifle's safety and set it against the log. "Will you come with me?" He did not answer immediately, and she appreciated this, that he was considering the question rather than simply agreeing, that his yes would mean something because he had thought about it. "Yes," he said. She nodded. Her hands had stopped shaking. The bird in the cottonwoods had found a different argument and switched to it. The fire needed wood and the horses needed water and they needed to eat something before they rode, and all of these things were true and manageable and hers to attend to, and she moved through them with the competence of a woman who had spent years being capable in circumstances that did not deserve her capability, and found that in a circumstance that did, she was capable still. They rode into Kearney on a Saturday, the town louder and more various than Harlow Creek, and the federal marshal was a woman from Georgia named Hattie Byen, who had the precise, unimpressed manner of someone who had heard every version of every story and was only interested in the facts. Nora gave her the facts, all of them in order, without decoration. Marshal Byen listened with the specific attention of a person who was building a case while you talked. "Drum's done this before," Marshal Byen said, not as a question. "I expect so," Nora said. "I expect so too." She made notes. "I'll need you to stay in Kearney 4 days while I send wires. Can you do that?" "Yes," Nora said. They stayed in a rooming house on the main street, separate rooms, and Nora slept better than she had slept in years. The solid, uncomplicated sleep of a person who has done what could be done and is waiting for the outcome, which is a different thing entirely from the sleepless vigil of someone waiting to see what will be done to them. On the second day, Cole found her in the evening sitting on the steps of the rooming house watching the street, and he sat beside her, and they were quiet for a long time in the way they had become quiet together, not from lack of things to say, but because the silence between them had become its own kind of conversation. "The marshal will file," he said. "I think so. And after—" She had been thinking about this, not with anxiety but with the particular attention she brought to any problem she intended to solve. West, her cousin, the territory, a life that was hers in the plain, unglamorous sense of belonging to her and no one else. "I'll go find my family," she said, "if they're still there. And if they're not, then I'll find out where they went." She looked at him. "You." He had his hat in his hands, turning it. She had learned that this was a thinking gesture, not a nervous one. "I've been thinking about going south. There's good work in New Mexico." New Mexico, where her mother had stood in a field and said the land didn't know the words men put on paper. She looked at the street. A wagon was coming in from the east, loaded with lumber, the horses patient and enormous in their traces. A child was chasing a dog past the general store. The light was going amber and long the way it did in the late afternoon of the high plains, turning everything it touched to something warmer than itself. "New Mexico is between here and the territory," she said. Cole was quiet for a moment. "It is," he said. She looked at him and he looked at her, and she felt it then, the thing she had been careful not to name, because she had learned that naming things too early was a way of losing them. It did not arrive like a revelation. It arrived the way the light was arriving, gradually, until everything was different and you could not have said exactly when the change had happened. It was in her chest, a warmth that was not the evening air, and it was in the specific awareness of his arm near hers on the step, and it was in the simple fact that she had told him where she was going and found that she was thinking about whether he might go the same direction. She had done enough surviving alone. She knew what it cost and what it was worth, and she was not romantic about it. But she was also 23 years old, and she had a body that remembered what safety felt like before she had learned to be afraid, and that body was telling her something now, the way a body did when it had stopped being afraid long enough to notice what else was there. "We could ride together," she said, "as far as New Mexico." "We could," he said. He was still looking at her, and there was nothing in his face that asked anything of her, which was the last thing she had expected and the first thing she had needed. "And from there, you'd know which way was yours." "Yes," she said. She reached out and covered his hand with hers, not because she needed to be held, not from gratitude or fear or the habit of appeasing someone larger than herself. She did it because she wanted to. Because his hand was warm and her hand was warm and the evening light was laying itself across the porch boards in long bars of gold, and she was here, in the fullness of herself, with her own boots on her own feet, in a place no one had put her. He turned his hand over and held hers. The wagon with the lumber had passed. The child and the dog had gone wherever children and dogs go when the light starts failing. The street was quieter now, settling into the particular piece of evening, and she sat in it and felt the warmth of his hand and the warmth of the air and the warmth of what she could only call her own life, return to her after years of being held elsewhere. Somewhere a cook fire had been lit. She could smell the wood smoke drifting down the street, the same smell as Cole's camp that first night, that same smell of a meal being made without malice, without obligation, without the weight of what she owed. Only this time she knew what it was. She had always known what it was. She had just been waiting to trust that it could be hers.